So as we saw, we have a little bit too much space at the bottom of our sections here, as you can see. So this is probably due to the padding that we added to the bottom of the sections earlier on. And an interesting way to access and to see exactly where the padding and sometimes where the margins and the borders of your content really are on a page is to go over onto the right-hand side of Dreamweaver's interface to the DOM panel, the DOM panel. DOM stands for Document Object Model. And really all it is an outline of all the elements on your page. And you can see here that if we click on any one of these, that they become outlined, at least the visible ones. Of course, when we click on the head, can't see anything because that's not visible. But when we click on the body, you can see that there now is an outline surrounding the entire visual part of the page. And if we clicked on nav, for example, again, can't see that because remember we didn't really put anything inside of the nav area, so it disappears because it has no content. But if we click on header, we do have content in our header. Remember, we have the H1 and we have the div for our logo inside of here. And you can see in the DOM panel that we can also click on the individual H1 or the individual div that has a class of logo. So each of these things becomes immediately selected and outlined inside the live view. And it's really a nice help. It also is a nice way to double check to see whether the structure of your HTML is up to snuff. So you can get a quick read on the different elements that you've used, the parent elements and the child elements, and quickly come to some consideration of whether or not you've left anything out or whether something might be in the wrong place. In this case, we can click on the section, specifically the one with the class of Washington, and you can see that that's outlined. And we can definitely see that most of the space that resides between Washington and Jefferson is taken up inside of the section. And if the space is inside of the element, then we know that that space is a product, more than likely anyway, of padding other than margin. Remember, margin would be the space in between two different elements. Padding is the white space that occurs inside a given element. So if we go back to our code, we can see that originally we had set a pretty excessive amount of bottom padding to all of our sections. Remember, each section, besides having the individual class name, also has the FF, Founding Fathers class, applied to it. So if we took off this padding, we could probably experiment with just eliminating that padding altogether right now and see where that leaves us. Knock off all of the bottom padding on the .ff and then go back and yeah, that might be cool. Click on the section here again in the DOM panel, and you can see that now we have eliminated all that space. You might want to add a little bit back because I think one of the things I might want to do is to add a bottom border as kind of a division to emphasize the fact that, one of these sections has ended and another one has begun. So a little horizontal divider wouldn't be a bad idea, I think. And if we add a border, we probably want to have a little bit of space between the border and the bottom of the content within this particular section. Right now, this is where the border would go, where this blue line is. So maybe I want to go back to this FF rule and maybe add back, I don't know, maybe 8/10 of an M, something like that. We can experiment. And then add a bottom border. So to add just the border on the bottom, we use border dash bottom. And then we can use the border shorthand, which includes both, actually all three of the basic properties: the width, the style, and the color. So if I want a solid style, and I want 1 pixel, and I want maybe just a gray color, that will add a border to all of our sections, and it will create a space between the bottom of the content and the beginning of the border of about 8/10 of an M. If we go back and look at our page now, we can see that indeed that's what happened. It might be a little too much. I think maybe want to cut that down maybe to a 1/2 an M. Let's go back and make that 0.5 M. Check it out in the live view. Yes, I think that looks pretty nice. We might even cut that down to 4 M, 4/10 of an M. Again, you know me, I get a little obsessive. I want to fine-tune things. So again, it's up to you guys, however close or far away you want to set your vertical spacing. We talked already about the H2 here and how close it is to the paragraph in the image. And got the same thing here with our bottom border. But I think that bottom border is going to help things and make the section look nicer. Now, again, when it comes to vertical spacing, I can see that there's probably a little too much spacing between our block quote and the paragraph. Again, that just sort of hits me as something that's a little excessive. It seems to make a little bit too large division between these two pieces of text, and the texts themselves are a part of one basic idea, talking about George Washington. So I don't want to have this much space. Now, the problem here is that we have a block quote below a paragraph, and if you remember what we have been doing in order to eliminate the space between items is to eliminate the top margin of the element on the bottom and then try to eliminate or reduce the bottom margin of the element on top. Because remember, the top and the bottom margins collapse. They're not completely additive. So only one of them really ends up being significant. And if that's true, you have to end up knocking out both of them in order to get these things closer together. That's a lot of work, and again, it might have some deleterious negative effects in other parts of the page. I might really not want to reduce the paragraph bottom margin here. So what else could we do? Is there a quicker, down and dirty sort of a way that we could come up with that would allow us to eliminate some of this space? And indeed there is. It's something that I would suggest that you do not use very often. I rarely use this approach, but occasionally it just seems to make sense. And it usually comes with situations like this, where there are two different types of elements on top of each other, and I want to reduce the space between them. What you can do is create a negative top margin to the element below. To me, that seems to make the most sense, because this is a block quote. We probably aren't going to use many block quotes in this FF series of sections. So it's possible that this might be the only block quote that we're going to have in this part of our page. So if we do something a little unusual with the block quote, it's not going to have an effect on other block quotes that might not need this effect. And the whole idea of the approach is, if we add top margin, of course, normally we're adding positive margin, and it's going to create more space between elements. But if we added a negative top margin to our block quote, then we're actually going in the opposite direction. We're reducing the space between elements. And that is what we want to do. So let's try that out and see how that looks. We have, we don't have a rule for our block quote. So let's make a rule. And just to be sure that we don't affect other block quotes later on in different parts of the page, let's create a descendant selector .ff space block quote. And we'll create a margin dash top, and oddly enough, instead of putting a positive, we'll make it a negative number. We'll say, I don't know what, maybe minus 10 pixels, let's say. And what that should do is pull the block quote up by 10 pixels instead of pushing it away. Let's see if that works. If we go to the live view, aha, it does. You can see that our block quote has gotten noticeably closer together. It's approaching, I'd say, pretty reasonable spacing. Again, it's up to you guys. If you decide that you wanted to have a little bit more space, you could reduce the negative number. If you wanted to increase the space, you could add a little bit more. So there's still a little bit of extra space there. Maybe you'd want to make that 12 pixels, maybe. Yeah, something like that. So that looks like these two areas of the page are more closely aligned with each other, which is the idea behind these two pieces of text. So again, this is a little trick. It's a kind of a hack. It's not something that I think that you ought to do very often, but it is possible to use negative values on margins. Now, you cannot do this with padding. No negative numbers for padding, but you can create negative numbers for margin, and the effect is to move the element in the opposite direction. It will move closer to whatever element is on that side of it instead of pushing further away. So it's a nice little trick. All right, so our page looks pretty nice. I like the H2. I like the image and the text running alongside of it. I like the fact that we have closed the gap between the block quote and the paragraph. And I think that the bottom border makes the section look nicer too. Now, you can notice down here, though, that Thomas Jefferson, for example, has a bottom border surrounding its text, but it doesn't seem to take cognizance of the fact that the image is inside of the section. And you might be wondering why this particular border is kind of acting funny. It just doesn't seem to be doing what it should be doing. And the reason is, again, has to do with floats. Floats are a little bit weird. Remember that when you float an object, elements sometimes act a little wanky. And we saw when we floated columns that the footer, for example, would want to swing around and wrap up around the last floated column, which oftentimes put the footer out of position. And we can also see here with the border that the border gets out of position too. And again, there's a little hack that we can use that solves this problem. It is, again, something that I don't try to use very often, but in situations like this, it comes in handy. So if we go back to the code again, we can go to that same FF rule that we've been talking about previously, because this is the rule that selects each of the sections themselves. And this particular problem has to do with the section and the fact that it's not really recognizing its own bottom border. And there is a property called overflow. And overflow normally is used to determine whether or not you want something that will extend perhaps unexpectedly out of its container, whether you want the exposed part to actually show up on your page or whether you want it to be cut off. And that's something that doesn't normally happen. It's not something that we're normally concerned about. So what designers usually use overflow for is exactly for this problem here, where the container element really has lost track of one of the elements inside of it that has been floated. If we set the overflow property to auto or to hidden, then because of the peculiarities of cascading style sheets in HTML, this seems to have the effect of kind of waking up the section and allowing it to actually recognize the fact that there are floated elements inside of it. So when we put overflow auto or overflow hidden on our element that is having the problem, and we go back and look, we can now see, bingo, the border on the bottom of Thomas Jefferson has now bounced down below the floated image, and everything is relatively copacetic. So again, another little tricky hack that designers and developers have been using for many, many years. There are other approaches, other ways of handling this that are a little bit more thoughtful and more thorough, but they're also a little more complicated. So for now, anyway, I think this is a nice, quick, simple hack that will solve the problem. So overflow hidden and also negative margins. Two little tricks of the trade that will help us get our pages to look nicer. All right, so our page is looking pretty good structurally, but I think maybe what we want to do is add some more content. So maybe we'll take some time here and just add more stuff to the page. If we go into the Founding Fathers text, you know, the more I think about it, I think that I didn't add text for Thomas Jefferson for some reason. I don't know why I left Thomas Jefferson out, but apparently I did. So let us do what we've done before and go to the web and search for Tommy Jefferson. And here we are in Wikipedia, my favorite place to go. And I think maybe we could just grab this first paragraph here. That might be good enough. And we'll copy that. And we'll go into the code view here. And go to the Thomas Jefferson text. There's a paragraph here. I'll get rid of that Latin text, and I'll just right-click and choose Paste. And now we have our text. Now, it's not quite as long as the George Washington text. Let's take a look and see how that is. It would be nice, actually, if we could get some text to go down past the bottom of the image. But on the other hand, remember, we're going to have 2 columns eventually on this page. Right now, what we're doing is seeing these sections as if we were going to keep this a 1-column page. But we're really not. We can see how this is going to look when we add 2 columns by moving in the width a little bit. And when we start to add columns and margins and whatnot, we'll probably end up with something like that. And you can see that if we squeeze it in enough, now it still doesn't quite jump down. I like to get it so that it's running underneath the image there. Maybe we should grab a little bit more text. I'd like to fill that in just a little bit more. So let's add this couple sentences here talking about Jefferson and the Barbary Pirates and the Louisiana Purchase. A couple of the things that he's most remembered for. We'll copy that, and we will go down and I will add that also. Maybe I'll add a second paragraph. I'll paste that in, and then I'll use Dreamweaver's built-in insert function. I'll select that text and then go into the top drop-down menu in Dreamweaver, the insert, and choose paragraph. And then I'll give that a hard return so that it's a little easier to see. So now we have a nice bit of text there. If we look at that live, you can see even at the full width of the page, we now have enough text to jump underneath the image. And with George Washington, when we squeeze it in just a little bit, you can see that we'll have 2 or 3 lines running underneath. So I think that makes the page look a little nicer. All right, now we have Benjamin Franklin and James Madison. Let's try to do those guys. And what we might want to do is add an image for Benjamin Franklin. And remember how we do that. We're in the live view right now. We want to go up and change that to design view. And then scroll down to Ben Franklin. Open up our images subfolder and find Benjamin Franklin. And here's an image of Benjamin. Franklin.jpg. we can drag this right out from the Files menu, as we have done in the past, and we can follow the cursor to the beginning of the paragraph and let go. Now this image is considerably smaller to begin with, but we want to try to maintain the same width. And remember, we had chanced upon a width that looked pretty good of 140 pixels. So I'm going to do the same thing here, keeping my eye on the Properties Inspector and getting this down to a width of 140. There we go. So that gives a consistency to the look of the page. It's possible that some of these will end up being taller than some others, but I think that that's okay. I think the width, as is usual on the web, is the most important dimension. So I think that's what we want to do. And we want to go up and we want to add our float left class. Now there's another way to do this float left that's a little bit easier. And some of you may have already figured it out, but I'll wait a little bit till we go a little bit further with this page before I talk about that. So let's add the float class to this image. Remember, we're adding it to the image. We're not adding it to the section. We're not adding it to the H2. We're adding the class float-left to the image tag itself. And again, once we do that, we can see that the text flows around the image instead of starting at the very base of the image. And that's what we want, because we don't want to waste all of this space to the right of our images. And we probably do, I think, have some text for Benjamin here. Let's take a look at our Word document. Yes, I have some stuff on Benjamin. I'm, again, not sure if it's as long as some of the others, but we can always add a little bit later. I mean, and you can add text right inside of the design view as well. So we don't necessarily have to jump to the code view in order to add text. So I can select this Latin text just visually right inside the design view, and then right click and choose paste, or go Command V, and we have, well, I think we have enough when we squeeze the page down, perhaps, to let that flow underneath the image. Let's take a look and see how that is in live view. So, oh, no. That's probably not going to be enough. So let me go out again to Wikipedia, and I'll key in Ben Franklin, and let's take this paragraph here, part of the paragraph anyway. We'll copy that, and we'll add this. Maybe we'll add it right to the same paragraph. That should be enough to get that to wrap around the bottom. That looks pretty good. And you can see, because we've added our most of our rules to the .ff class, that the spacing of the headings, the spacing to the right of the image, and spacing underneath and between the last bit of content and the border are all consistent, and we don't have to worry about doing that over and over and over again. Once we do it once, bingo, all the other sections behave in a consistent manner. And again, this is the beauty of using these repeatable modular-like patterns when we're creating the design of our page. All right, let's see if we can find a James Madison picture. We'll look in the Images subfolder on the right-hand panel, and I'm pretty sure we have, yes, James Madison picture.jpg. All right. So again, we want to switch from live view to design view. And then we want to drag our image over to the beginning of the paragraph. I didn't quite hit that right. There you go. So this is considerably fatter. So this is going to make this image less tall as we squeeze it down to 140, but it's okay. So again, I'm going to go through the process of moving this down to 140, and it is going to be considerably smaller than the others because it's kind of almost rectangular, whereas the others were a little bit more elongated. And again, we could solve that problem. We could take this image into Photoshop, and we could manipulate it in ways that would give it some extra height, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. So again, we want to go into the code view, and we want to apply the float left class. Copy that. And we can add this to the James Madison. And you can see that that works again. And when we move up to live view, you can see that wraparound effect continues to work. And let's double check. I think we have some text for James Madison. Let's look inside of, let's see, where's my Word document here? Yeah, James Madison right in the beginning here. Copy that. And we'll switch to live, from live view to design view again. And we will select the Latin text right inside the design view and then paste in the text on James Madison. And then we can shift back to live view, and we can see that that does the trick. So we have Madison, Franklin, Jefferson, and Washington all neatly stacked up, and the page is looking pretty good. And again, like I say, you can jump through and select different parts of your page using the DOM inspector inside the panel here to get an idea of exactly where your different elements are, where they begin, where they end, and how much space they take up, and what kind of padding and margin they may have, just visually. So this DOM inspector is really quite nice. All right, why don't we take a quick break here, and we'll come back in a moment and go a little bit further with our page. All right, let's continue working on our Founding Fathers home page. We want to do a few things here that I think might improve the look and the functionality of the page. One thing I was thinking about was that this is a home page, the information on this page is not all the information that would hypothetically be on our website. We would have a dedicated page, or maybe even a whole section, dedicated to each of the founding fathers. So this is just like a lead-in to the information that might occur on a real website that had more in-depth content. And normally what you want to do is add links from this home page, kind of a teaser page, so that people can click and go to the George Washington page or the George Washington section, Thomas Jefferson dedicated page, whatever. So of course we have to have links in order for people to do that. Now what we could do is put a small link at the bottom of each of these sections saying something like, see more information, or go to the George Washington page, or whatever. But another way that we could do it, which might be more effective, would be to create a link that actually includes the entire section. That way, wherever people click inside a given section, they would automatically be taken to that particular more in-depth page. So there are different ways that we can do that. In the old days, I think I mentioned this in class once or twice, using an A tag was considered to be kind of a poor choice if you wanted to include a bunch of other elements inside the A tag. Usually we simply wanted to have a piece of clickable text or maybe a single image as the center point, the clickable area inside the opening and closing A tags. But nowadays that has changed, and what we could do would be to add an anchor tag that went around the entire content of each one of our sections. That way, anywhere anyone clicked inside of here would automatically affect a jump to the particular page that they might be interested in. Let's take a look at the code and see how we could do that. So if we go into the first section here of George Washington, I'm thinking that right inside the section beginning tag, we could put an anchor tag. So I'll put an A tag with an href attribute. Remember, you have to have the href attribute, and you have to double quote where you want to go. And perhaps we'll just put the hash mark in there, the number sign, that is indicative of just a nowhere link. And the question is, where do we end this anchor tag? We've got it here right at the beginning of the section. We could put it right at the end of the section, right before the end. We could put it in here. And move it over a little bit so that we actually have the entire section surrounded by our href. So in other words, all of the content here, the H2, the paragraph, and the block quote, and the site tag, everything is inside, is a part of the clickable text area of this single anchor tag. Like I say, didn't used to be able to do that, but now with HTML5 it's possible, and you see this happening on a lot of websites. Now if we go back to the live view to see how that looks, we can see that indeed it does appear that it works. We've got the little pointy finger on our cursor as we roll over all the content inside of the section, so that works. The problem is that we have the text turned to blue. which is the default color for anchor tags. And we also have the default underline. And of course, this really kind of ruins the look of our page. So we're going to have to figure out some way to get rid of this. And I think we probably know the answer to that. We can create some rules that will help us out. So what we want to do is create, again, perhaps a descendant selector. We know that all these sections have a class of FF. So we can use FF. And what we want to do then is to put the A tag, because the A tag is right inside of the FF section. And that might work. Let's see. Now, to get rid of the underline, hopefully you will recall we would use text decoration, right? And we want to set that to none. And hopefully that gets rid of the underline. Let's look and see. Yep, it works. We've gotten rid of the unsightly underline, but we still have the blue color for the text. So all we need to do is go in, set color equal to black, assuming that we want to continue using pure black. Color black, a simple designation for color. And there you go. So now our George Washington section looks just like it did previously. It looks just like Thomas Jefferson section. But now when we roll over, we see that we get a pointy finger everywhere we go inside of the section. And that makes it a lot easier for people to click. Now, the only caution that I have using this kind of an approach is that it kind of goes against my normal dictum that you should really make sure that people understand where your links are. And there's no indication here that anything in any of these sections is actually a link. So that is a minor problem. However, I've noticed throughout the last, actually over the last 2 or 3 years, that this repeating element kind of a design has become so popular on the web that I think people have become accustomed to seeing that these repeatable sections are oftentimes clickable anywhere within them. So I think that we probably could get away with this. If this were a real website, what I would probably do is keep careful track of the statistics for the home page here and see whether or not when people come to the home page, whether they are clicking on these sections to go further inside the website. And if it turns out that they are not, if the statistics show that these links really aren't being clicked on very often compared to the amount of traffic that's coming to the page, then it may be an indication that we have to change the design in order to let people know that you can click inside here. So I think that would be, in the real world, the approach that I would take. But for now, let's presume that people are going to see and understand that you can click anywhere inside here and go to the George Washington or the Thomas Jefferson section. All right, so let's do that for the other sections that we have. Copy this href here so that I don't have to redo it. And I want to put that right inside of the opening tag of the other sections that we have created. Thomas Jefferson, I'll scroll down to Benjamin Franklin, add the opening tag there, and then scroll down to James Madison. And then we want to put the closing tag right before the section ends. So we can do that. So in between the paragraph ending and the section ending, we want to go back and close these A tags. Right. So that's pretty easy to do. Save that. Take a look in the live view. And we can see here, if we scroll down, that Thomas Jefferson section has the pointy finger all the way through it. And Benjamin Franklin has the pointy finger. And James Madison has the pointy finger. All right. So it's pretty easy to do. And I think that in the long run, that would be an effective way to approach the links. Now, what we probably would want to do would be to, duplicate the navigation. So you don't want to just rely on people using that kind of an approach to get to these different sections. So we would have a navigation area, maybe underneath the H1, that had links going to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, et cetera, so that these links here would be sort of backup links, which is another reason why I think that we can get away with not indicating through visual means that they are links. So we can put those in at a later point, somewhere up in the head area here. Otherwise, I think one of the other things that we might want to try to do that we did in class, remember when we were working on a page similar to this, we decided that having the images all run down the left-hand side and the paragraphs all to the right started to look a little bit, kind of boring. And we thought that it might be more interesting visually if we went back and forth and showed one image on the left-hand side, the second image on the right, the third on the left, the fourth on the right, so that we could get a little bit more variety in the look of the page. So again, the question is, how do we do that? How do we get, for example, Thomas Jefferson to jump over to the other side of his section? Well, of course, we know that in the beginning, we set the Thomas Jefferson image to have a float of left. So if we change that, if we created a float right rule and added that to the Thomas Jefferson image, then more than likely we would get that effect. So let's, again, look at the code here and see what we could come up with. We have up here on my line 22, the rule that we created some time back, dot float left. And what we could do is create another rule, a companion rule, that would go in the other direction. So I'm going to copy that and paste it. And then I'm just going to change this to float right. And then, of course, we have to change the rules. Float right. And then we want to also change the margin. Remember, we said that when we float something in one direction, we want to add a little bit of margin in the opposite direction. So when we float left, we want margin right. In the same sense, when we float right, we want margin left. Make sense? So now that we have this rule float right, let's go down to Thomas Jefferson, to the image, and you can see here inside of the Thomas Jefferson section, inside the paragraph on line 83 here, we have a class of float left. If we change that to right, let's see what happens. If we go back to the live view, we can see that indeed Mr. Jefferson moves over to the other side of his container. So that's cool. That's kind of what we want. Now, if we look at that section, though, it seems to me that it's a little bit off still, because we have the heading still over on the left-hand side. So I think it might be nice to move the heading over towards the right. And again, we could do that. We could make a rule for, let's say, a rule for dot Jefferson space H2. Now we want to probably add to this, make it a group rule later. But for right now, we can just concentrate on this first instance of our section. And we want to set the property of text align. And one of the options for text align is to set that to right. So when we go dot Jefferson space H2, we're telling the browser to look for all second level headings if they're inside of any element that has the class of Jefferson. And there's only one element that has that, that's second section. So the Thomas Jefferson heading should jump over to the right. And that's exactly what happens, yes. Now, it's up to, us to sort of decide whether or not we want that to set just like that. Right now, the image is it lined up to the end word, the end letter of the heading, and that's just how it works. We could move this whole set of elements over a little bit to the left, but I think that looks nice. I think it looks okay. The only thing that I might do, and I think we might have done this in class, I can't remember, is maybe change the alignment of the paragraphs. Right now we have the default alignment left aligned. And if we have everything kind of shifting over to the right, maybe what we'd want to do would be to create a rule that set the paragraphs off to the right. So we can make another rule for dot Jefferson. And this time we have a paragraphs in there. We could go text align right, or the paragraph as well. And again, if we look at live view, you can see now that that might be a little nicer looking. Again, it's up to you whether that is something that looks good. I think that looks kind of interesting. It's a little bit different. What we could do, because I think the ragged left still kind of looks a little funny, what we could do is instead of going right, we could go justify. And when we do that, the browser will create even column text on the left and the right. I think that might look the best of all. If we do that, though, I think that maybe we might want to do that for the entire set of sections, not just for the ones that are going to go on the right-hand side. So maybe we could go back and create kind of an all-purpose rule. Let's go back to .ff and let me copy this. The .ff is the rule that covers all of the sections, right? So if we add text-align justify to our .ff rule, that covers all the sections. And you can see that, well, yeah, the paragraphs and the block quotes actually end up working off of a different right-hand alignment. That's a little funny. Not sure I've seen that before. Not sure why that is happening. But anyway, it looks okay. Oh, I think because the block quote has the automatic margin on the left and the right. So if we wanted to eliminate that, the block quote here, remember we have block quote margin top negative. We could also add to this rule and say margin right 0. So this says that any block quote that is in any of our sections should move up a little bit towards the element that's above it, and now should not have any extra margin on the right-hand side. So now we can see indeed that that is the case. And because I have this little dash here, it looks like we might not actually have justification, but if you look closely, you'll see that little dash there is actually really should go with the cite tag. So maybe what we do would be to put a little break tag right in front of that dash. It's just a little thing, but you know, trying to get things to look just right. So we got the cite tag here. The cite tag, remember, is an inline element, so it doesn't normally drop down to its own line, so it's not block level. But if we add a break tag right in front of it, or right behind it, either way, it becomes kind of, you know, these combination together creates a hard return. Now we have that on the same line, and this can't, there's not enough space, there's just not enough content here for it to go all the way over to the edge, so it stops. I think that looks a little bit better. Actually, what we might want to do, again, trying to get real picky here, is to use an M dash instead of a regular dash. I think that actually might look the best of all, because you can barely see that dash when we have a serif font. So remember, in Dreamweaver, we have the option to go up to the Insert and go down to HTML, and then all the way down to character, and then we can choose M dash, and you can choose all this other stuff as well, or you can choose other, and you get a nice pop-up menu here that shows you all the extra characters that are included within this particular font. So there's all kinds of things that we can add to our page here simply by using the insert. And the one that I think I want is the M dash. I think that's it down here in the bottom row. So if we click that and click OK, actually it's going to go in front of Founding Fathers. That might not be a bad idea too. I might want to put the M dash here instead of this regular dash. Make that look a little nicer. And we can copy that and put it down here in the site tag. I'll select that regular dash and then paste this M dash in. I think that might look cooler. You can see the M dash up here and the H1 much longer, and the same thing down here. I think that might look a little cooler. Right, so that, I think, spiffies up our page a little bit. Seems to me that our image, I don't know, again, this is a really small thing. The image is writing a little bit high above the beginning of the paragraphs here. You can see that on all these images. And again, if you see something consistent like this, there is another little trick that you can use. This is probably a pretty nice situation for using this little trick. We saw a couple little tricks previously, the negative margin trick. And what we could do is use just regular margin here. Maybe that would be a better way to do it. Let's try to just add a little bit of top margin to these images to begin with to see whether that solves the problem. If not, I have another approach up my sleeve, but that other approach is a little more complicated, and the more I think about it, maybe I want to wait to talk about that at a slightly later date. But what we could do is add a little bit of top margin to push the image down. Looks like all we need would be about maybe 2 or 3 pixels or so. So how do we access those guys? Well, we have the .ff again, right, which allows us to select all of the sections. And the sections only have one image. I don't think we're going to add multiple images to any of these. So what we could do is simply create another rule with descendant selectors using .ff space img. And that's going to tell the browser to select all images if they are inside of an element with .ff. Then we can try this out. Go margin top 3px and see if that works. Yeah, it pushes it down. Maybe we want to go a little bit more, maybe about 6. Try 6. Yeah, that's just about right. That's just about right. Maybe 8. Try 8. Again, this is just up to you. Yeah, I think 8 is pretty good. Right. So again, that I think makes the page look a little spiffier. Now, the other thing that we were talking about a little bit earlier in the video here was the fact that ultimately we want this page to have columns. And maybe this is an appropriate time to think about creating our columns. I think we did this in class, as I recall, I think. Anyway, let's go back and try that. We want to create a column. Let's say we want to put it on the right-hand side. That's the typical side to put a sidebar or a column. And I had the idea of putting information about the Declaration of Independence and also the Constitution inside of the sidebar to give it some interesting content. And I think we know by now, hopefully, that in order to create columns, we use the float and clear method. And we've talked about that a couple times in class. We haven't gone through it quite as in-depth or as often as I would like to, so I want to take this opportunity to talk about it here. So we have our main section. If we look in the DOM panel here and look inside the body, we can see that we have the main. If I click over here on the main, and you can see that the main is surrounds the H1 homepage, the logo area, and the sections. And what we want to do is, I don't think so. Let's see. The main really shouldn't, yeah, the main does not include the H1 and the logo. That's inside the header. So the main area really right now just contains the 4 sections that we have. And that's fine because those are the pieces of content, the modules, the repeating patterns that we want to keep inside the main column. And we want to probably put that over on the left-hand side and give that, a larger width than the aside column. So we have, you can see the main opening tag here on my line 83 in this code view. And if we go down, you can see the closing main tag is on line 116 here. And then we have, right after that, an opening and closing aside tag. Now, there's nothing in there right now. So maybe what we could do would be to add a little bit of content so that we have something to put inside of our column. In the aside, if we want to have 2 different parts to the aside, I want to have something, like I say, on the Declaration of Independence and on the Constitution. So I think it would be a good idea to, again, create sections inside the aside. And we can put a class, let's see, the first one might be Declaration of Independence. We'll call that DOI. I think that's what I called it last time I did that. So the Declaration of Independence section, and then we can create another section with the class of, call it const for Constitution. So those would be our 2 sections, and inside the section, always a good idea to create a heading. Now here, the question comes up, what kind of heading do we want to use? A lot of designers and developers would continue in this area with an H2, thinking that this heading is really of the same ilk, the same hierarchy as the headings in the main. My thinking is, because this is a secondary piece of content, it's defined as an aside with content that is from the beginning defined as less important than other parts of the page. My tendency is to start out my headings 1 level lower than the majority of headings in the main area. So again, it's up to you to decide how you want to approach that. I don't think it's wrong to do either one, but I'm going to go with an H3 here. And I'm just going to call this Declaration of Independence. And we have some content we could put inside of a paragraph. I'll put a paragraph there. And let's do the same thing for our other section here, the Constitution. I can copy this. Remember, copying and pasting is a good thing, you know, if you know what you're doing anyway. Don't want to copy things that are not going to be correct, but anytime that you can do less typing, always a good thing. And Constitution of United States. And we have an area there for paragraph of content. Now, inside of Founding Fathers text, the Word document, we should have a bunch of text that we can use. I'm going to double click there and open up that text. Down towards the bottom, we have Constitution and we have Declaration of Independence. And it depends, I don't know how much we want to put in there. The really important part of the Declaration of Independence, I think, is about like that. That's the part that people, you know and read and memorize in high school and whatnot. So we could start with that. If we need to add some extra, we can. But I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to put that here inside the paragraph. And then we can go back to our Word document and we can grab some stuff from the Constitution. Now the Constitution really the most important part of the Constitution is the preamble. And I have Article 1, Section 1 here. So I'm not sure what we might want to do there. Maybe I'll just grab the preamble for now, because that's the thing that most people remember. Again, we can add some more stuff if we need to. And we'll paste that in. And the preamble there, we could add a break tag there so that that's on its own line. And maybe we could make that strong or bold. So that it stands out. And I could put an ellipsis here and here to show that this actually continues. All right, so if we look in the live view, we can see that we have some content down at the bottom. Now, Declaration of Independence, Constitution of the United States, the preamble. And along with that, we can add an image, like we did before. And if we look in our images subfolder, I think we have some images here. If we take advantage of the Assets tab, which is down below the Local Files tab, usually right next to the DOM tab, Assets there, you can see that we get a readout. I can bring this up a little bit, and we can pull this over so we can, get a nice big view of the different images that are inside of our image folder. So that's pretty nice. And let's see, I think this is the signing of the, I'm not sure. I don't know whether that's the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. This is the signing of the Constitution here. I'm not sure about that. There's another image with flag-declare that has a image of We the People. So maybe we could use that one. So again, if we change the live view to design view like we've done in the past, we can add this flag-declare.jpg to our Declaration of Independence section. And since this is in a different container, we don't necessarily have to keep this at 140. Right now this comes in at 274 pixels wide, so that's probably okay. The Constitution signing, oh, that's really big. And that one's kind of smaller. All right. Well, let's use the bigger one, because I like this to be a little bit bigger. I like 274 would be a nice size. So let's bring in the Constitution-signing1.jpg and bring this in and put that. Now, that's going to be bigger. But remember what we did before. I've got my properties panel here. You can see that it already has the information for images/Constitution signing. And it's showing that we have a width of 907 pixels. So what we want to do again is grab the bottom right corner and hold down the Shift key and wait until we get this down to 274 pixels. And that would make it exactly the same width as the image for the Declaration of Independence. Right. Now again, we have these images set inside of the paragraphs, but because the aside is going to be much narrower, it's possible that we may simply want to have the images sitting on their own in between the heading and the paragraph. We could put them perhaps in a separate paragraph of their own, or we could put them in a figure, which would probably be the most semantic way to approach things. So let's see how it looks once we create our columns before we start to do anything else. So now anyway, we have the content available for us to make our columns worthwhile doing. So if we go back up to the cascading style sheet area, if you recall, what we want to do is set the main area. I don't think we have any rules for main or side. So I'm going to put this right after the body tag. I'm going to create a rule for the main element. Now remember, the main is not a class, it's an element. So we don't put a dot in front of it. So main, we want to float the main to the left. And remember, the other thing that we've got to do when we float elements is to give it a defined width. And we have a width here of 1200 pixels max based upon what we did with the wrapper div, remember? So here, I want to give the aside a little bit extra width. I would normally go about 750 here, or 800 even. But, you know, let's go 750 pixels. Then we could give 400 pixels to the aside, which is a little bit more than I normally do, but we've got those images. So I don't know. We'll see. We can, again, change this if we decide that's too big or too small. The aside, we want to float, and I usually like to do that in the opposite direction. So float that to the right, and then give that a stated width of, let's say, 400 pixels. That still leaves us with 50 pixels left over, right? So 750 and 400 is 1150. So we have 50 pixels still in between these two when we float one to the left and one to the right. And that should be sufficient margin between the two elements. So if we look at the, not the design view, but if we go back and choose live view here and click on live, you can see that that does work. We now have two columns. Might want to have, I don't know, because there's a lot of content on the page here, and because these elements are over on the right-hand side, might want to have more than just 50 pixels. Might want to have might want to have 100 pixels there. So let's knock this down to 350. I think it might look a little better with more width there in the margins. I think that might look a little better. All right, I think right now would be a good time to cut this off and call it a day for now. I do want to give you your questions for the day. Remember, we are sort of spreading out our two quizzes that we would normally have in the second half of the class across each of the videos on the days that we would normally meet. So I had given you 5 questions on the first video for Monday, March 20th. This video is destined to be put up on March 22nd, on Wednesday. Remember, I said that I would try to adhere to our normal class schedule so that you can kind of rely on getting new content every Monday and every Wednesday. So this will go in on Wednesday. And I'm not sure what the homework assignment is going to be for Wednesday. Instead of putting that in the video, I will put up a blog post up on the Logjam website, as I normally do, and I will explain the assignment to you. I just haven't made up my mind as of yet exactly what that's going to be. But I will give you a relatively simple assignment and try to explain it right on the website. If you have any questions about the assignment, you can always email me and ask me to explain things further for you. But so for now, let us take a look at the questions that I want to ask you. Let me shift over to my other applications so that you can see these questions. Hold on a second. All right, so I think you can see these. This is the second set of questions for March 22nd. Oops, I'm sorry, folks. I keep getting the dates mixed up. It shows you where my head is at these days. I'm suffering along with maybe a lot of you not knowing what day is what. But for some reason I kept thinking that Monday was March 20th. I think I said that and wrote that on the Logjam blog a couple times, when really last Monday was March 30th. And I keep thinking that today, Wednesday, is March 22nd, when really it is April 1st. So whenever you see March 20th, think March 30th, and whenever you see March 22nd, think today, April 1st. So I've just got the dates confused a little bit. So disregard the date on top of the new set of 5 questions here. That should say April 1st. But otherwise, the questions are correct, and the content in the video, I think, is correct. So now back to our previous recording. Thanks. Number 1, the CSS overflow property is used to make sure your text displays properly. Number 2, in Dreamweaver, we can drag an image from the Assets panel onto our page in the design view. Number 3, we can use CSS border property shorthand notation to add the color, style, and width of our border all at once. Number 4, using negative margins on an element brings it closer to its neighbor rather than farther away. And number 5, you cannot use an anchor element to surround an entire section element. All right, so those are true, false. As before, write down your answers. Excuse me. And just say number 1, true, number 2, false, whatever. Make a note there that these are March 22nd questions, and send those to me in an email. And as I mentioned a few times previously, please use my home Prairie Studio address, because we're trying to ease up on using the email system over at Oakton, because everything's going online now and they're getting swamped with the emails. So send your homework, send your questions, send any other concerns that you might have to me at john@prairiestudio.com. And remember that everything for the class from now on is going to be up on the Logjam website. So if you haven't already subscribed, please go up to the Logjam website and subscribe to it. That way you will get an email notification every time I add something special up on the web, whether it is another video or a homework assignment or some kind of a notification that something important is happening. So it's a good idea. Please stay in touch, and if you haven't sent me your homework or your answers to the questions, if you haven't gone up and looked at the videos yet, please do so. the only way that you can get credit for the class is to continue to do the work. I know that things are tough and that we're all a little overwrought and concerned. And if you're having problems in that regard, please, let me know that as well. Maybe I can help. There are things that the school is trying to do to help students get through, this tough time. And there are things in the works that I can't talk about right now that might make student life even easier. So please stay tuned. Don't give up on the course. I've heard from a majority of you, but I haven't heard from everyone in the class. And please let me know where you are, what you're doing, what your thoughts are, whether you are still in the area. I know a couple of students have left the area temporarily anyway. Let me know what's happening with you, and perhaps, if you're having some problems, I can lend a hand and give you some help or some advice. So anyway, hang in there. Do everything that you're told to do by the medical authorities, and hopefully over time we can all get through this. All right. Thanks a lot.